The desert stretched endlessly before her, the horizon wavering with heat, the sky a pale, merciless blue. To anyone else, it was nothing but miles of emptiness, silence, and dust. But to Marissa Hale, this place felt like a challenge, an expanse she needed to conquer. Or maybe, if she was honest, a place where she could finally disappear. She parked her old Jeep Cherokee on the dirt shoulder, the engine sputtering like it always did before cutting out. A thin film of sand immediately began to coat the windows. The road behind her was empty. The road ahead disappeared into a mirage. Marissa tightened the straps of her pack, checked the water bottles inside, and slung her journal over her shoulder. Then, she shut the door without locking it. Because what thief would bother coming this far into nowhere? No one saw her step off the asphalt and onto the desert floor. No one watched as she walked farther and farther into the heat, leaving behind the safety of the road. 3 years later, hikers stumbled on something strange near a low ridge of red rock 30 miles from the highway. At first, it looked like nothing but sandstone carved by wind and rain. But as the sun shifted, shadows revealed lines that were too straight, too deliberate. Someone had etched words into the stone, words that had survived the blistering wind and the sandstorms. The message was crude, shaky, as though carved in desperation. And it told a story no one was prepared to believe. Marissa's disappearance became one of those cases people whispered about. Some swore she wanted to vanish, that she had debts, secrets, a past she couldn't face. Others thought it was another desert tragedy, another hiker lost to heat stroke, dehydration, and bad judgment. But the words carved into the stone said otherwise. The words suggested she hadn't been alone, and that someone had wanted her silence. On the morning she vanished, Marissa had left her apartment in Phoenix without telling her roommate where she was going. She carried only a canvas pack, a cheap knife, a map that looked decades old, and her weather-beaten journal, already half filled with scribbled notes and drawings of rock formations. Neighbors later remembered seeing her leave just after sunrise. They described her as focused, though one woman said she looked more like someone heading for an execution. Detectives pieced together her last movements as best they could. Gas receipts placed her at a station in Gila Bend. Surveillance footage caught her Jeep rolling through a tiny town called Agua Fria. After that, nothing. The desert swallowed her. The search had lasted weeks. Helicopters circled until the county's budget dried up. Volunteers combed arroyos and canyons. Dogs tracked faint scents that evaporated in the heat. But there were no footprints, no campsite, no sign of a struggle, just emptiness. Until that message surfaced. When park rangers first reported the carved words, many dismissed them as a prank. The desert was full of graffiti, petroglyph copycats, initials in rock, kids daring each other to leave marks in places they didn't belong. But when investigators hiked out to the ridge, they realized this was different. The words weren't random. They were written like a confession, like a warning. And next to them was something even stranger. A set of initials no one recognized, carved deeper than the rest, as though someone had wanted them to last forever. The initials didn't match Marissa's. And yet every expert agreed. She had been the one who carved them. Her brother, Daniel Hale, was the first to speak publicly about the discovery. For 3 years, he had refused interviews, shutting himself off from the speculation and rumors. But when the rangers showed him photographs of the stone, he broke his silence. "That's her handwriting," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "I don't care how crazy it sounds. That's Marissa. I'd know it anywhere. But if Marissa had carved the message, then one question remained. Why hadn't she come back? The story of Marissa Hale was about to unravel again, and this time, it would lead far deeper into the desert than anyone imagined. Because the stone didn't just hold a message, it held a map. And following that map would uncover a nightmare no one was ready to face. When investigators finally stood before the sandstone ridge, The air was hot enough to blur their vision. The sun hammered down with a weight that made even breathing feel like labor. But still, every one of them leaned closer, tracing the shaky grooves with their eyes, whispering under their breaths. The message was short, no more than a dozen words. The lines weren't clean. Whoever carved them had done so with a dull blade or a rock, scraping into the surface until blood must have mixed with dust. It read, "Not alone. They watch. Don't trust the mark." Beneath it, carved deeper, almost violently, J.R. The words sent ripples through the small town of Agua Fria when they were first reported in the local paper. Within days, larger outlets picked it up. "Missing woman's final message found in desert," screamed one headline. Another spun it darker. "Carved warning suggests foul play in hail case." For Daniel, the words were like gasoline on a fire he had tried desperately to smother. For 3 years, he'd forced himself to imagine his sister at peace, maybe lost to the desert in some tragic accident. But this was something else entirely. Not alone. They watch. He couldn't stop repeating it in his head. The sheriff's department tried to temper speculation. At a press conference, Sheriff Morales stood stiffly in front of cameras, sweat dampening the armpits of his khaki uniform. "We cannot verify when the carvings were made or by whom," he said, his tone clipped. "There are no direct identifiers linking them to Miss Hale, other than the opinions of family members. We will continue investigating this matter, but we urge the public not to draw conclusions." But the public had already decided. Talk radio hosts dissected the phrase, "Don't trust the mark." Paranormal forums claimed it hinted at desert cults. Survivalist boards suggested Marissa had stumbled onto cartel operations. And then there were the conspiracy theorists, who swore the mark was a government code, a warning about secret military testing grounds buried deep in Arizona's wastelands. Theories bred like wildfire. But Daniel wasn't interested in theories. He wanted answers. 2 weeks after the carving was reported, he packed his truck with supplies and drove to Agua Fria himself. The town was little more than a cluster of buildings baking under the desert sun. A gas station, a bar with a faded sign, a diner that served watery coffee, and eggs that tasted of grease. Locals eyed him cautiously when he asked about the ridge, when he mentioned his sister's name. Some shrugged, some shook their heads. A few muttered that people who went out into the desert alone had only themselves to blame. But one man, a leathery ranch hand named Cole, leaned across the diner counter when Daniel mentioned the mark. "You don't want to be asking about that," Cole said in a low voice. "Folks disappear when they start sniffing around." Daniel stared at him. "Disappear? What does that mean?" Cole wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, looked toward the window where the sun blasted through. "The desert don't forgive curiosity. Your sister learned that the hard way. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. He rented the only available room above the bar, where the ceiling fan creaked with every turn, stirring the smell of stale beer. He lay awake, staring at the cracked plaster. Marissa's face burned into his mind. In the morning, he drove out with nothing but his GPS, a gallon of water, and a worn photograph of his sister smiling in front of the Superstition Mountains. The hike to the ridge was brutal. The sand shifted under his boots, and the heat shimmered off the rocks like liquid. By the time he saw the sandstone formation, he was dizzy, his shirt glued to his back. The carving was smaller than he expected, almost easy to miss. But when he crouched down and touched the grooves with his fingertips, something cold ran through him. It was her. He knew it. The uneven slant of the letters, the way the N in not tilted too far, the jagged cross of the T. He whispered to the empty air. "What did you find out here, Marissa?" That's when he noticed something else. A second carving, lower to the ground, nearly buried in sand. It wasn't words this time. It was a symbol, a circle, broken by a jagged line down the middle, and beside it, 3 dots. Daniel took photos and sent them to the sheriff's department, but the reply he got was brief. Already documented. No further leads. But Daniel couldn't let it go. He printed the image and studied it late into the night, tracing the shape of the broken circle, the arrangement of the 3 dots. It didn't match any brand, gang sign, or tribal petroglyph he could find. It felt older, meaner. And then, by accident, he came across something on a message board. A user named Desert Echoes had posted a blurry picture taken in Nevada years earlier. In the picture, carved into a boulder, was the exact same symbol. Circle, jagged line, 3 dots. The caption read, "Found near an abandoned mine." Locals call it the mark. They say it means you're not welcome the next morning, Daniel decided. He would follow the map. The rangers had noted that the carvings weren't random. There were faint arrows etched alongside them, pointing deeper into the desert. Most dismissed them as scratches. But Daniel knew better. Marissa had left him a trail, and if he followed it, he might finally learn the truth. But what Daniel didn't know was that someone else was already watching him. The same way, 3 years earlier, they had watched Marissa. The trail began as scratches, shallow lines cut into rock faces that could have been mistaken for nothing more than wind damage or accidents of erosion. But Daniel followed them anyway, heart-pounding, scanning every surface with desperate eyes. Each mark pulled him farther from the highway, deeper into the silence. The desert became a world of its own. Canyons carved like scars, dry washes littered with bones, stretches of sand where heat rippled so violently he could barely trust his vision. He carried a compass and GPS, but he relied more on instinct, on the thought that if he kept seeing the faint scratches, he was walking where Marissa had walked. By the 3rd mile, he found another message. It was hidden under an overhang, so faint he had to tilt his head to catch the light across it. 3 words, "Not safe ahead." And beneath it, a crude arrow pointing forward. Daniel's breath caught. He ran his fingers over the grooves. The warning was shaky, jagged, carved in haste. She hadn't just been leaving notes. She had been terrified. He stared at the arrow for a long time. Logic told him to turn back, but he couldn't. Not after 3 years of silence. Not after holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't died out there alone. He tightened the straps of his pack and kept walking. That night, he camped in the shelter of a boulder. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The desert was alive with noises he couldn't identify. Scratches, faint whispers of wind that sometimes sounded like voices. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined Marissa sitting in the same spot, carving desperately into stone, praying someone would find her words. At some point, exhaustion pulled him under. And that's when he dreamed of her. She stood in front of him, hair tangled, skin burned by sun. Her lips cracked, her eyes hollow. She lifted a shaking hand and pointed behind him. When he turned, he saw the same broken circle with 3 dots carved into the ground, glowing faintly in the sand like embers. He woke in a cold sweat. And in the gray dawn, when he stepped outside the shelter, his stomach dropped. The symbol from his dream was real. It had been carved into the side of the boulder while he slept. Daniel froze, every muscle locked. His knife was still in his pack. His flashlight was beside him. He hadn't heard a sound all night. But someone had been there. Someone close enough to touch him. He scanned the horizon, but the desert stretched empty and still. No footprints in the sand. No sign of life. Only that symbol, freshly carved, mocking him. His first instinct was to run back to the jeep, to get out before he became another ghost swallowed by the desert. But the image of Marissa's face in his dream held him there. If she had endured this, then so could he. He pushed onward. By midday, his canteen was already half empty. Heat shimmered so violently the rocks looked like liquid, melting into the horizon. His lips cracked, his throat burned. But then he found the canyon. It was narrow, winding between walls of stone that seemed to press closer with every step. The air inside was cooler, but the shadows felt suffocating. Carvings covered the walls here. Not just Marissa's, but hundreds of others. Names, dates, symbols, some so old they had nearly worn away. And again, that same broken circle with 3 dots, over and over. He stopped, running his hands over them. What is this place? He whispered to himself. The farther he went, the worse it became. Scraps of fabric wedged between rocks, a rusted canteen, a single shoe, relics of people who had walked this path and never returned. And then he saw it. At the far end of the canyon, etched into the wall in jagged, bloody grooves. "Help! Still alive!" The handwriting was unmistakably Marissa's. Daniel staggered back, his breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed that it wasn't possible. 3 years had passed. No one could survive out here that long. And yet the message looked fresher than the others. Almost recent. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the canyon wall, flashlight clutched tight, every nerve on fire. Twice he heard stones shift, as if someone moved in the darkness just out of sight. Once, he swore he saw the glint of eyes reflecting light at the canyon's edge. But when he shined his beam, there was nothing. He whispered Marissa's name into the void, hoping for an answer. But the only reply was silence. Until just before dawn. That's when a voice called back. Hoarse, broken, barely above a whisper. "Don't follow." The sound disappeared as quickly as it came. Daniel scrambled to his feet, shining his light wildly across the canyon walls. Nothing. Only dust. Only shadows. But he knew what he'd heard. It was her voice. And it wasn't begging for help this time. It was warning him. The desert does something to the mind. It breaks time into fragments, heat waves in the day, endless black at night. Out there, seconds feel like hours, and a single whisper can linger in your head until you're not sure if you dreamed it. That's how Daniel felt when dawn broke across the canyon walls. His throat was raw, his tongue swollen from thirst, but his mind raced with only one thought. He had heard Marissa. It wasn't possible, and yet, he couldn't shake it. The way the word "don't" cracked in her voice, the way it sounded not like a hallucination, but like his sister's fear, pulled from memory. If she had survived, even for a while, then she had been out here longer than anyone thought. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't gone. Daniel followed the canyon deeper. The walls tightened until he could stretch his arms out and brush both sides at once. The ground sloped downward into shadow. The carvings grew denser here. Not just words, but symbols layered on top of each other. Some circles intersected, others fractured. The 3 dots appeared again and again, always aligned differently, sometimes in a row, sometimes in a triangle. At first glance it looked like chaos, but the more Daniel studied them, the more they resembled a code, a language left by the lost. Then he found the next message, scratched hurriedly into stone, lines still sharp and fresh. They mark the ones they take. Daniel froze. His skin crawled. The mark. The symbol that haunted the rocks. The words seemed to confirm it wasn't a warning Marissa had invented. It was something real. A system. A claim. He kept walking. By noon, the canyon opened into a dry basin ringed with cliffs. The sun poured down, but the air felt strangely heavy, as though the world here held its breath. And in the center of the basin, half buried in sand, stood a structure. Not a natural formation. It was stone stacked deliberately, forming the shape of a crude doorway. The lintel beam across the top was cracked, but the entrance still stood, a black rectangle that yawned into darkness. Daniel's heart hammered. He pulled his flashlight from his pack, flicked it on, and stepped closer. The lintel beam bore carvings deeper and sharper than any others. The broken circle, the 3 dots, dozens of them. A wall of marks. As if whoever had built this doorway wanted to make it clear. Only those chosen, those marked, could enter. The air inside smelled of dust, and something older, metallic, like rusted iron. Daniel swept his light across the interior. The walls were close, carved straight into stone. Passages branched off, narrow and uneven, twisting like veins. He had stumbled into something ancient, something hidden deliberately. The silence was crushing. Even his footsteps seemed swallowed whole. And then, he saw it. A handprint, pressed into the wall in a smear of what looked like dried blood. Beneath it, scratched so faintly he almost missed it. D-run. The D was jagged, the line broken, but it was enough. His chest clenched. Marissa had written to him. 3 years before, maybe longer, she had carved a message for her brother, as though she knew he would come looking. Daniel staggered back against the wall, heart racing. His light flickered, then steadied. And that's when he realized he wasn't alone. A sound echoed faintly from deeper in the tunnels. Not the wind, not stone cracking. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, growing closer. Daniel killed his flashlight instantly. Darkness pressed in on him like a weight, suffocating, absolute. He crouched low, trying to control his breathing, every muscle tight with fear. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched so long, he thought maybe he had imagined it. Then, from the blackness, came a voice. Low, gravelly. Not Marissa's. You shouldn't be here. Daniel's blood turned cold. He gripped the knife in his pocket, though the blade suddenly felt useless. The voice came again, closer this time. She left her words for you. And now you followed them. Foolish. A faint scrape of metal against stone. You'll wear the mark too. Daniel bolted. He sprinted back toward the entrance, flashlight swinging wildly. The beam caught glimpses of walls covered in carvings, symbols like eyes staring at him as he ran. The doorway burst into view, blinding white sunlight flooding his vision. He stumbled out into the basin, sand sliding under his boots, and didn't stop running until he collapsed against the far cliff wall, chest heaving. The silence returned. No footsteps followed. The doorway yawned behind him, still and dark, as though nothing had happened. But Daniel knew the truth. Someone was in there. Someone who had been here when Marissa carved her messages. Someone who was still watching. That night, Daniel made camp on the cliff ledge overlooking the basin. He kept his flashlight on, scanning the doorway again and again, but nothing emerged. Yet just before dawn, when exhaustion finally dragged his eyes closed, he dreamed again. Marissa stood in the doorway this time, her hands bloody, her eyes wild. She whispered the same words he had heard in the canyon. Don't follow. And then, softer, almost pleading, they'll mark you too. Daniel woke to find something carved into the rock beside his head. The symbol, the broken circle, the 3 dots, fresh, as if carved in the night while he slept. And this time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a claim. He had been marked. Daniel stared at the carving beside his head, his stomach twisting into knots. The broken circle, the jagged line, the 3 dots. It was deeper than the others he'd seen in the canyon. Fresh, deliberate, almost mocking. It hadn't been there when he lay, down. Someone had crept close enough to carve it while he slept, and he hadn't heard a sound. He pressed his palms against the stone to steady himself, but the desert suddenly felt wrong, like the stillness was staged, like every shadow hid eyes. He wasn't just following Marissa's trail anymore. He was in it, and now he was marked. The basin was lifeless in daylight. No footprints around his camp, no sign of movement near the doorway. Just sand and rock. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the voice he had heard in the tunnels. Gravelly, human, but something in it rang hollow, wrong. She left her words for you. You'll wear the mark too. The words gnawed at him as he packed up. By midday, he climbed the opposite cliffs, hoping to get a vantage point over the basin. From up there, the landscape stretched in endless waves of ochre and red, the horizon shimmering with heat. But then he noticed something strange. Circles. Huge, overlapping circles in the desert floor, etched into the ground so faintly they could only be seen from above. Some were broken, intersected by jagged lines. He counted 3 sets before the mirage swallowed them. It wasn't natural. The mark wasn't just carved into stone. It was drawn across the desert itself. Daniel descended, following the ridgeline. The trail was brutal, but at last he stumbled upon another carving, half hidden in shadow. This one chilled him more than any before. D, if you find this, run. They don't kill, they keep. His breath caught. It was hers. The way she looped the R, the uneven N, Marissa's handwriting, and the last line, carved deeper as if she'd pressed with every ounce of strength she had left. I'm not alone. The words rattled in Daniel's skull as he pushed onward. If she wasn't alone, then who was with her? The ones she called they. And what did she mean by they keep? The canyon walls narrowed again, funneling him into a valley that stank faintly of iron and rot. That's when he found the first body. It was nothing but bones, half buried in sand. The skull lay tilted back, mouth open in a silent scream. Around its neck still hung a cord with a cracked plastic ID badge, the lettering faded but barely legible. J.R. Daniel's chest tightened, the initials from the carving on the sandstone ridge. Someone else had been out here with Marissa. Someone who hadn't made it out. The bones were marked too. The circle and 3 dots etched crudely into the sternum. Branded. Daniel staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His sister hadn't been alone. She'd met others out here. Others taken, marked, left to rot in the desert's hidden corners. He forced himself onward, though every instinct screamed to run. Because if there were bones, there could still be the living. As dusk fell, Daniel reached a ravine where the rocks bore deeper carvings than anywhere else. Entire panels of symbols layered so thickly the stone looked scarred. At the center of one wall, words cut deeper than the rest. Marked ones belong. And below it, another handprint smeared dark against the stone. Not old and brown like dried blood. Wet, fresh. Daniel's skin crawled. He shined his flashlight across the ravine walls, his pulse roaring in his ears. That's when he heard it. A rustle behind him. He spun, light sweeping across jagged rock. For a split second, he caught the outline of a figure. Tall, thin, moving too quickly for the eye to track. Then gone. Daniel stumbled back, breath hitching. "Marissa!" he called out, though every part of him knew it wasn't her. The silence that followed was broken only by a whisper, so soft he almost thought it came from inside his head. "You belong now." Daniel didn't sleep that night. He wedged himself into a crack in the ravine wall, knife in hand, eyes darting to every shadow. Hours dragged like centuries. The desert night was alive, stones shifting, footsteps crunching faintly in sand, whispers threading through the air. Once, he swore he saw eyes glowing faintly in the dark, reflecting his flashlight from a ledge above. By dawn, his body was shaking from exhaustion. And that's when he saw the newest carving. It hadn't been there before. Right across from where he'd hidden, gouged into the wall so deep the grooves looked burned. "Welcome, D." Daniel's knees buckled. He dropped to the sand, heart hammering. They knew him. They had been watching since the beginning. Marissa's words clawed through his head. They don't kill. They keep. What had she meant? And why did he suddenly feel like the desert itself was closing around him, ready to keep him too? The desert has a way of making every sound feel amplified. The scrape of Daniel's boots against gravel echoed like thunder. His ragged breathing felt deafening in the silence. And yet, the things that moved around him, the watchers, never made a sound he could truly catch. Only hints, only whispers. He stayed on his knees for what felt like hours, staring at the words freshly carved into stone across from him. Welcome, D. It wasn't possible. He hadn't slept. He hadn't closed his eyes. He had been alert every second of the night, watching, waiting. And still, they had been close enough to carve that into the wall, close enough to touch him. By mid-morning, Daniel forced himself to move. He packed quickly, stuffing his gear back into his bag with trembling hands. He had two options: turn back toward Agua Fria or keep pushing deeper. Logic told him to go back. He had evidence now. Photographs, Marissa's carvings, the body marked with the symbol. Enough to hand over to authorities, enough to make them listen. But something in him knew he wouldn't make it back. Not marked. The mark wasn't just a warning. It was a claim. And the desert didn't give back what it claimed. The ravine twisted, downward into a narrow gorge. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer. Daniel ran his fingers over the walls as he walked, his skin brushing over decades of markings, names, warnings, symbols. Some so faint, they looked more like scars than carvings. One message stopped him cold. Don't drink. They poison water. Beneath it was a half-buried canteen. The cap was unscrewed. Sand poured over the opening. Daniel didn't dare touch it. His throat ached from thirst, but he tightened his grip on his own canteen. He whispered under his breath, "What the hell did you find out here, Marissa?" And as if in answer, another message appeared further down the gorge. Not alone. Not human. The gorge opened into a hollow, where sunlight barely reached. At the center, stone pillars rose like jagged teeth. And on every surface, etched in overlapping layers, was the mark. Hundreds of them. Circles broken, dots scattered, jagged lines cutting across. A cathedral of symbols. Daniel stood frozen, the weight of it pressing down on him. This wasn't vandalism. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. A system. The mark meant belonging, ownership. And he had it carved into his fate now. From behind one of the pillars came movement. A figure stepped into the dim light. Thin, filthy, hair matted, skin burned raw by sun and wind. At first, Daniel's breath caught in hope. Marissa? But as the figure moved closer, his heart sank. It was a man. Barely more than bones wrapped in skin, his eyes wild and sunken. His lips cracked as he whispered, "You're marked too." Daniel swallowed hard. "Who did this to you?" The man shook his head violently. "Not who." "What? They keep us. They—" Watch's voice broke, as though the words themselves hurt. "Once marked, you don't leave." "Where's my sister?" Daniel pressed. His voice cracked. "Marissa Hale. She left messages. She—" The man's eyes flicked to the carvings around them. "She fought. Harder than anyone. But once you wear the mark—" He trailed off, shaking. "They feed on us." Daniel's stomach clenched. "Feed?" The man's gaze darted upward, toward the jagged cliffs. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They're here." Before Daniel could speak again, the man bolted, scrambling into the shadows between pillars, vanishing into cracks too narrow for Daniel to follow. His frantic footsteps echoed once, then nothing. Silence fell, but not the same silence as before. This one was heavy, watching, waiting. Daniel's skin prickled. He turned slowly, and that's when he saw them. Shapes on the cliff edge. Tall, motionless, almost blending into stone. Not men. Too long, too still. The desert swallowed detail, but Daniel felt the weight of their eyes. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. He stumbled back into the gorge, panic clawing at his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but the walls funneled him deeper, instead of out. That's when he found another carving, etched low into the stone where someone must have crouched to leave it. "Dee, don't let them touch you!" Daniel's throat tightened. His sister's handwriting. She was still leaving him breadcrumbs, still fighting to warn him. By nightfall, he reached another cavern, This one larger, with a ceiling so high his flashlight barely touched it. The air was damp, colder than the desert outside, and on the far wall was a carving unlike any he'd seen before. Not words, a drawing. Crude, shaky, but clear. Figures, human-shaped, but their limbs stretched too long, their heads too narrow, their eyes enormous and hollow. And beneath them, smaller figures bent low, their heads marked with the broken circle, kept belonging. Daniel staggered back, bile burning his throat. His sister hadn't just warned him about being watched. She had tried to tell him what was watching. That night, Daniel heard them more clearly than ever before. Whispers threading through the dark. Not words he understood, but a cadence, a rhythm, circling his camp like wind through hollow bones. Once, he saw a figure pass between two boulders, tall and silent. And just before dawn, when exhaustion dragged him into a shallow sleep, he dreamed again. Marissa stood inches from him this time. Her face was streaked with blood, her eyes wide with terror. She gripped his arms and hissed, "They don't kill! They keep. And now, they keep you." Daniel woke with a scream. On the ground beside him, freshly carved into the sand, was a single word: stay. By the time the sun rose, Daniel's nerves were shredded. His body screamed for rest, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marissa's face, bloodied, desperate, whispering warnings. The word stay burned in his mind like a brand. The desert wasn't just dangerous. It wasn't just empty. It was alive in ways he didn't understand. And now, it had him. He forced himself to move again. His canteen was almost empty, his food gone. Hunger clawed at him, but thirst gnawed harder. He knew he couldn't last long without water. The gorge carried him deeper, into land no map had ever touched. He couldn't shake the feeling that Marissa had walked this same path 3 years ago, leaving messages in stone with bleeding fingers, hoping someone, him, would follow. And yet, what did she want from him? To save her? Or to witness? Around noon, Daniel found another carving, hidden low behind a collapsed boulder. "Don't trust the others." His heart hammered. Others? Survivors? Or the same half-starved man he had met yesterday? The words dug into him like a knife. Who had Marissa meant? The path narrowed until it ended in a steep drop into a cavern below. Daniel slid down on his side, scraping his arms raw, landing hard on jagged stone. His flashlight beam swept across the space. The cavern walls shimmered with carvings. Not names, not words, drawings. Hundreds of them, layered over one another, all showing the same thing. Human figures with the mark carved into their foreheads, standing in lines, facing taller shapes, watching shapes. And in one drawing, crude but unmistakable, was a woman with long hair, arms outstretched, as if trying to shield the others. Marissa. Daniel pressed his hand against the stone, his chest tightening. "You fought them," he whispered. "You tried." A sound echoed behind him. Soft footsteps. He whirled, flashlight catching movement. A figure stood at the edge of the cavern. Not one of the watchers. A woman. Thin. Wild-eyed. Her hair cut short with jagged ends. Her clothes torn to rags. She raised a trembling hand. "Don't make noise." Daniel's breath caught. "Marissa." The woman stepped closer, shaking her head. "Not Marissa." "They call me Anna." Her voice cracked on the name, as if she barely remembered it belonged to her. Daniel's hope crumbled, replaced with a sick dread. If Anna was here, living like this, how many others had been kept? She crept closer, eyes darting to the cavern ceiling. "They don't like when we gather. Too many of us, and they thin us out." Daniel swallowed. "Who are they?" Anna's lips trembled. She traced the mark on her forehead with a dirty finger. "The ones who choose. They need us, but not the way you think." Her words felt rehearsed, spoken too many times. Daniel pressed. "My sister, Marissa Hale. Do you know her?" Anna's eyes flicked toward one of the wall drawings, toward the woman standing with arms outstretched. She fought. They hated her for that. But she's still here. Daniel's heart lurched. Where? Anna's gaze shifted toward a tunnel branching from the cavern. Deeper. Where they feed, Daniel wanted to demand more, but Anna suddenly stiffened. Her head jerked upward. The skin on her arms prickled. They're close, she whispered. She vanished into the shadows before he could speak again, gone as silently as she had appeared. Left alone, Daniel followed the tunnel Anna had indicated. The walls grew slick, damp with moisture. The air thickened. For the first time in days, he smelled water. His mouth ached with need. And then he found it. A pool, wide and still, reflecting the pale glow of mineral light. Beside it was another message carved into the stone floor. Don't drink, not water. Daniel's hands shook. His thirst screamed for relief, but the words stopped him cold. Not water. He leaned closer, shining his flashlight into the pool, and saw movement. Shapes drifting just below the surface. Pale, elongated. Watching. He stumbled back, his boots scraping rock. The water rippled, not from his movement, but from something rising beneath. A pale hand broke the surface. Long, thin, too many joints. It slid back into the depths without a sound. Daniel's stomach twisted. The pool wasn't water. It was them. He pressed deeper into the tunnels, desperate now. He couldn't stop, couldn't go back. Every wall was carved with warnings, messages left by hands that shook with fear. And then he saw it. A carving, unlike any other. It was a name. Marissa. The letters dug deep, jagged, desperate. Beside it was a final message. Don't follow. I'm theirs now. Daniel's breath caught, his knees buckling. His sister hadn't been leaving him a trail to save her. She had been leaving him a trail to warn him away. But he had come anyway. And now he was marked. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, pressing into his skull. His flashlight flickered, batteries draining faster than they should. And in the flickering dark, he saw them. Figures emerging from the walls themselves, pale and jointed, eyes hollow and endless. They didn't touch him. Not yet. But when dawn broke, Daniel found new words carved into the stone beside his camp. Words he hadn't written. Welcome to the keep. When Daniel woke, he wasn't sure if he had slept at all. His body ached, his mind throbbed, and yet the memories of the night felt sharper than reality. The whispers, the figures that never touched him, only circled. The words carved in stone that hadn't been there before. Welcome to the keep. He traced the letters with a shaking finger. Whoever, or whatever, was leaving these messages, they were speaking directly to him now. Not warnings, invitations. The tunnel narrowed, pressing him onward. Every inch was carved. Some were fresh, some were worn smooth. Messages, names, drawings, symbols, layered so thick the walls themselves looked alive. He began to notice a pattern. The mark repeated in clusters, sometimes beside names, sometimes alone. Other times, a mark was carved deeply, as if branded. Those were always followed by silence in the messages beyond. It hit Daniel slowly. The deeper someone went, the less they wrote. And then, nothing at all. The keep didn't just trap people. It consumed them. Hours passed. He followed faint signs of human passage, scrapes in the rock, old ashes of fires, scattered bones. Some animal, some not. He tried not to look too closely. But then he found something he couldn't ignore. A necklace. The chain snapped, the charm still intact. He knew it instantly. Marissa's silver locket. The one she'd worn since she was 16. He clenched it in his fist until the metal bit into his palm. His sister had been here, alive, fighting. And maybe, God help him, she still was. The tunnels opened suddenly into a vast chamber. Daniel froze at the threshold. The cavern was immense, its ceiling lost in darkness. The floor was smooth, almost polished, as though countless feet had worn it down over centuries. And across the far wall stretched a mural, not carved hastily, not desperate scratches. This was deliberate, designed. It showed rows of human figures, each marked with the broken circle, standing in lines. Above them loomed taller shapes, with elongated limbs and eyeless faces. And at the mural's center, a human figure stood apart, arms raised, protecting, defiant. Daniel staggered closer, breath hitching. The face was crude, but the hair, the stance, he knew it. Marissa. She had stood against them here. She had left her mark, and the keep had immortalized it. A noise rippled through the chamber, low, vibrating the stone itself. Daniel spun, flashlight cutting through the dark. Shadows shifted. Not one, dozens. Tall, jointed figures slid out from the walls themselves, pale skin glistening in the light. Their movements were too smooth, too silent. Daniel's knees threatened to buckle. But the watchers didn't strike. They circled, always circling. And then, through their ranks, a shape stepped forward. Not one of them. A human. Her hair tangled, her skin burned, her clothes torn to rags. Her eyes wide, wild, and impossibly alive. Marissa! Daniel's voice cracked like glass. She stared at him, trembling. For a heartbeat, her expression softened. Recognition, disbelief, love. Then it hardened into terror. "Daniel," she rasped, her voice shredded. "You shouldn't have come." He stumbled forward. "I found your messages. I thought you wanted me to find you." She shook her head violently. "No, I wanted to stop you." He held up the locket. "You're alive." "We can go." Her scream cut him off. "No." "You don't understand. There's no leaving. Not once you're marked." The watchers closed in. Not attacking, just pressing closer, hemming him in. Their presence was suffocating. Marissa clutched his arms, her fingers digging deep. "They don't kill us, Daniel. They keep us. They take what makes us us. They hollow us out." Her voice broke. "I fought them. I tried. But every day, they take more. And now you." She choked, unable to finish. Daniel's heart hammered. "Then fight again. With me. Will?" She shook her head, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "You don't fight the keep. You endure it. Until there's nothing left." The watchers moved closer still, their limbs brushing the stone, their hollow faces inches away. Daniel raised his knife, hands shaking. "Stay back!" The creatures didn't flinch. Instead, one reached out, slow, deliberate, and traced the mark on his forehead with a finger too long, too thin. A cold fire shot through Daniel's skull. His vision swam. Whispers roared in his head, overlapping voices, pulling, clawing. Marissa screamed, yanking him back. "Don't let them in! Fight it!" But Daniel felt the mark burn, alive, spreading through him like roots. The keep was claiming him. When he blinked, he was no longer in the cavern. He was standing in endless desert, the sun blazing, the horizon empty, alone. Except, not alone. Marissa stood beside him, whole, unscarred, her face the way he remembered. She took his hand. "This is how it begins. They give you the dream, the life you wish you had. Until you forget the real one." Daniel pulled away, panic surging. "No, this isn't real." Her face twisted with pain. "That's what I said." 3 years ago, Daniel jolted awake, gasping, back in the cavern. His sister's hands gripped his shoulders, her eyes frantic. "You can't let them take your mind," she whispered fiercely. "Once you forget, you're theirs forever." The watchers stood silent, encircling them, waiting. That night, Daniel carved into the stone himself for the first time. His hands shook, the letters jagged. "Still here. Not theirs yet." When he finished, Marissa stared at the words, her face breaking into a sob. "You're stronger than me," she whispered. "Maybe you can still fight." But her eyes told him the truth. No one left the keep. Not even her. The mark never stopped burning. Every breath Daniel took felt borrowed. Every blink a risk. The whispers pressed harder, seeping through cracks in his mind, promising silence if he only let go. Marissa never left his side. She moved like a ghost, leading him through tunnels she seemed to know too well. Sometimes she whispered warnings. "Don't look at them too long. Don't touch the walls. Don't drink anything here." Other times she just stared ahead, silent, as if afraid to trust her own voice. It struck Daniel how much of her was already gone. They camped in a narrow fissure that night, walls pressing tight on either side. The watchers never entered small spaces. Marissa said they preferred the open caverns, where their size could unfurl. Daniel scratched into the stone by firelight, the act of carving grounding him. "I remember." Marissa watched. "That's the only weapon you have left," she said quietly. "Memory." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "When I first came here, I wrote everything I could. My name, my life, you. I thought if I could hold on to the words, I could hold on to myself. But the keep wears you down. You forget to write. Or worse, you forget why the words matter." Daniel reached for her hand. She let him hold it, but her grip was weak. "Then we'll write together," he said. "Until we get out." She shook her head. "You don't get out, Daniel. You endure." The next day, they pushed deeper. The passages grew colder, slick with condensation that dripped from above. Strange bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, painting everything in a sickly blue glow. Daniel touched none of it. Marissa moved with practiced caution, as if each step had been rehearsed countless times. "They let us roam," she said, "as long as we don't try to leave. We're livestock, Daniel, fed just enough to keep going, kept close so they can take what they need." His stomach churned. "What do they take?" Her eyes darkened. "Pieces. At first, memories, faces, names, then will, then whatever's left. When they're done, you're nothing but a shell, still breathing, still walking. But not you anymore." She didn't need to say more. Daniel had seen the half-starved man in the pillars. He'd seen the silent eyes of those who once carved warnings. Now, only shadows. That night, Daniel dreamed again. This time, he was back in his childhood home. The kitchen smelled of coffee, his mother humming at the stove. Marissa sat at the table, healthy, smiling, as if none of it had happened. It felt real. Too real. But on the fridge, carved deep into the enamel, was the mark. Daniel snapped awake, heart racing. His knife was clenched in his hand, blade slick with blood where he'd gripped it too tight in his sleep. Marissa crouched beside him, whispering, "That's how they take you. The dreams. Don't let them feel better than the truth." By the third day together, they reached the heart of the keep. It wasn't a cavern. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a cathedral. Columns of stone rose higher than he could see, etched with countless marks, layer upon layer. The air hummed with whispers, not faint now, but thunderous, pressing into every nerve. And in the center was an altar. Upon it lay bones. Dozens, maybe hundreds, piled and scattered, some fresh. Daniel gagged. Marissa's voice was a whisper. "This is where they bring us when we're empty. When there's nothing left to take." The watchers appeared silently, sliding from the walls, surrounding the altar. Daniel clutched Marissa's arm. "We have to leave." "They won't let us," she said. Her voice was steady, resigned. "They're waiting for you." His blood ran cold. "Me?" She nodded. "They've already marked you. You're not a visitor anymore. You're theirs." The watchers parted, leaving a path toward the altar, inviting him forward. Daniel shook his head, backing away. "No, I'm not going. I won't." Marissa's hands tightened on his shoulders. Then you'll have to fight. Not them. You can't fight them. Fight yourself. Hold on to who you are. If you lose that, they win. The whispers surged, overlapping voices tearing at his skull. His knees buckled, hands clutching his head. He could feel the mark burning hotter, branding deeper. Memories slipped. His childhood, his parents, his first job. Faces blurred, names vanished. "No!" he screamed. "I remember!" He slammed his knife into the wall, carving blindly. "Daniel!" The whispers faltered, just slightly. Marissa dropped to her knees beside him, her own knife out, scratching her name into the altar stone. Marissa. Together, they carved. Word after word, name after name, until their hands bled. The whispers screamed, furious. The watchers shifted, limbs twitching, their silence breaking into inhuman shrieks. But they didn't strike. They only circled, watching. When their hands could carve no more, Daniel collapsed. His vision blurred, but the words were there, etched deep, undeniable. He clutched Marissa's arm. "We can keep fighting. We can hold on." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can." "I can't," Daniel froze. "Don't say that." She shook her head. 3 years, Daniel. I've already given them too much. Some days I wake and don't know my own name until I see it carved. Some days I forget you existed at all. I'm already more theirs than mine." Her voice broke. "But you're still strong. You have to carry me, if I can't carry myself." The watchers crept closer, their pale limbs brushing the altar stone. One reached toward Marissa. She didn't flinch. Daniel swung his knife wildly, screaming, "Stay away!" The blade cut nothing but air, but the creature recoiled anyway, pulling back into the shadows. The whispers quieted. Not gone. Waiting. When silence fell again, Daniel lay beside his sister in the flickering glow of their dying fire. His hand found hers. She squeezed once, weak but certain. "I'm glad you came," she whispered, "even if it's the end." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. It's not the end. Not yet. But deep inside, he knew the truth. They weren't escaping the keep. The only question left was how much of themselves they could save before it claimed them whole. The fire died before dawn. Daniel and Marissa sat in darkness, the glow of their carved names the only anchor left against the endless whispers. Every second felt stretched, suspended, as though time itself bent in the keep's cathedral. When the first faint light of day filtered into the chamber from cracks above, Daniel thought, for just a moment, they might have survived the night. But the watchers didn't leave. They never left. Marissa stirred first, her body trembling as though she were caught in fever. She pressed her hand against the carving of her name, tracing each letter again and again. "It's fading," she whispered, "even the words. They don't hold as long anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. "Then we'll carve again. Every day, every hour, whatever it takes." Her lips trembled in something between a smile and a grimace. "You don't understand. They've already taken too much of me." "No," he snapped, his voice breaking. "You're still here. You're still you." Her eyes, hollow, but still hers, met his. "Not all of me." The whispers surged then, louder than ever, crashing against them like waves. Daniel pressed his palms against his temples, fighting to remember. His name, his sister, the desert, the life outside. But the keep was cruel. It gave him images. Marissa's face healthy, alive, smiling under a wide blue sky. His parents laughing at the dinner table. A life untouched by loss. It offered him everything he wanted. All he had to do was surrender. Marissa clutched his shoulders, dragging him back from the abyss. Her face inches from his, her breath ragged. "Don't let them give you dreams. Dreams aren't real." Her nails dug into his arms. "Promise me, Daniel. Promise you'll remember yourself. Even if I can't, his throat ached. We'll remember together. Tears slid down her dirt-streaked cheeks. If I lose myself completely, don't stay for me. Don't let them hollow you too. The watchers moved then, slow and deliberate, circling closer than they ever had. Their limbs grazed the altar, their hollow faces bending toward the siblings. Daniel stood, knife in hand, shaking. You can't have us. The words sounded pathetic in the vast cavern, but he carved anyway, slashing the blade into stone. Not yours. The letters glowed faint in the flickering light, defiance carved into permanence. The watchers shrieked, a sound so sharp his vision blurred. But they didn't strike. They only waited. Marissa swayed beside him, her body weakening. They'll never stop. Not until one of us breaks. Her voice cracked. And I can't fight them anymore. Daniel's chest caved with grief. Don't say that. But she was already stepping forward, toward the altar, toward them. He lunged, grabbing her arm. No! You're not giving yourself to them. Her eyes met his, full of sorrow and love. I'm already theirs, Daniel. But you're not. Not yet. If I go, maybe they'll let you stay you. Maybe they'll be satisfied. He shook his head violently. I won't lose you again. Her whisper cut him open. You already did. The watchers parted, opening the path to the altar again. Inviting. Demanding. Marissa pulled free of his grip, her step steady now. Almost calm. Daniel's knife trembled in his hand. He could run. He could fight. He could carve until his fingers broke. But the truth crushed him. The keep always won. Not with force, with inevitability. Marissa reached the altar and turned one last time. For a heartbeat, she looked like his sister again, defiant, unbroken. Remember me, Daniel. Her voice cracked. Promise me you'll remember. And then the watchers closed in, surrounding her, limbs weaving like a living shroud. Daniel screamed her name, but she didn't cry out. She was gone. Silence fell. The whispers quieted. The watchers drew back, leaving Daniel alone in the cathedral. On the altar, where his sister had stood, only one thing remained. A carving, jagged but unmistakable. Daniel, don't stay! He stumbled forward, collapsing against the altar, sobbing until his body shook. His knife slipped from his hand, clattering against stone. But through the grief, her last words echoed in his head. Don't stay. Not stay in the keep. Not stay in their grasp. Not stay hollow. She had given herself so he could still fight, so he could still remember. Daniel rose, every muscle screaming, every nerve raw. He pressed his hand against her final message, then carved beside it with bloodied fingers. I remember. The watchers didn't move. They didn't need to. They had what they wanted. But Daniel had what they feared. Memory. Defiance. Himself. When he finally stumbled back into the desert days later, ragged, starved, near death, he carried only two things: the locket, and the words carved into his skin with a dull blade. Daniel, I remember. 3 years later, rangers found him wandering near Agua Fria. He couldn't tell them where he'd been, couldn't explain the scars etched into his forehead. But when they asked about Marissa, he only whispered one thing. She's still there, in the keep. And if you hear the whispers, don't follow.